Hi, all. I hope you had a good spring break. We're following up this week with a lecture on Post Impressionism. Last week, or a couple weeks ago, we talked about Impressionism. Post Impressionism is going to take the direction that the artists are moving and take it to the next step. It's really a distinction and a technique that had already been started. So, as we talked about in Impressionism, the artists were trying to capture the first impression that you got as you entered a space, and usually capturing light and how that looks. And so we talked about Monet, reflection off the pond with his water lily series. Degas, as far as his capturing the natural light coming through the windows on the ballerinas, and we're talking about that you start to see the artist's hand. Post Impressionism continues that direction. Matter of fact, the brush strokes are starting to get more distinctive and more bold and shorter, even to the point of you look at Seurat's painting on page 382, and it's a style called pointillism, and the paint actually doesn't touch each other. It's small dots that are placed side by side to create this illusion of shading and transitioning, and the whole painting is just simply dots. And this is called pointillism. Matter of fact, if you look on the page next to that, 383, you have Paul Cézanne, who is one of the he's an artist during Post-Impressionism, and then a large influence in the next art period, Cubism. And if you looked at these three art periods side by side, you can literally see the progression of the artist's thinking and as their technique evolves. And it's getting shorter and shorter to the point where in Cubism, the brushstrokes get where they're actually dividing up the world, and it's not so much just the artist's hand making these bold strokes. The phrase, and I'm on page 126 in the workbook for Post-Impressionism, which was from 1884 to 1905, is make thoughts and feelings visible. Make thoughts and feelings visible. And really is what this means is that by seeing the artist's hand and seeing the way that they're starting to represent the world in these hard, bold brushstrokes, short stabs and dots and really short strokes, you can actually feel the expression. You can feel the artist, what they're trying to convey, and it has a visual effect for it. So you can not only see it, but you can almost feel it by seeing it on the canvas. Let's see. Oh, well, so then it leads me to probably one of the most recognized works of art, and this is the piece by Vincent van Gogh, Starry Night, on page 385. And here's where you can actually see exactly what Post-Impressionism represents, is these bold brushstrokes that actually create directional force, one of our vocabulary, visual element vocabulary words. So your eye follows the brushstroke across the painting, and it gives you this feeling of tumultuous sky, and that's what the brushstrokes creates, and that's what it's talking about. And matter of fact, in the Starry Night, every part of it is just these separate brushstrokes that makes you feel kind of anxious or like something's happening, and your eye follows these brushstrokes throughout the painting. Another artist which represents this art period is Munch, Edvard Munch. And I talked about him in the last lecture because I was describing, we used him to describe why a painting might be worth as much as it is. And Munch is such a great example because, as I talked about, his work just looks very amateur, young, innocent. It doesn't seem to have this expertise and this perfection that you see in a lot of fine artists. And but actually, is what this is a representation of Post-Impressionism, because even though he's using pastels and water colored pencil, you can actually see it's divided up into these strokes, and that's the way it's created. It's very rough and visceral, very strong. And so Munch his painting is on 390, The Scream, And matter of fact, that's your art analysis for this week. Is I'm asking you to repeat what I talked about a couple weeks ago, and what I'm introducing to you today is like why would that painting, even though it seems so rough and not very impressive at all, why would someone pay $120 million for it? And as I talked about in the last lecture, and I'll briefly discuss again today, um, it's less about the art and more about what the art represents. The art for these art periods is simply the expression of ideas and new ways of thinking and new ways of seeing the world. And sometimes there are new techniques that are being introduced to represent the world the way that people are seeing it and experience it. And Monk is one of these artists that is at the forefront and expressing this and represents that. And so therefore his body of work by itself has value because it represents something bigger than him. So characteristics of this art period, as I've said, are bold brushwork, simplified shades, flat colors, the textured brushwork, pointillism. One other thing I would point out to you is Paul Gauguin. And on page, I think I went past him, page 387 is actually a nice example, also 386 of Gauguin. And the reason I bring up Paul Gauguin is because another thing that the artists are starting to do during this time is explore symbolism. So you think, well, what's the big deal? You think symbolism is always used, but actually the artists that were trying to accurately represent the world, or even artists, which we haven't talked about, like minimalists, they don't want messages in their art. They want the art to be as it is. So there's the symbolism they're trying not to explore or use any type of symbolism or metaphors or things that are adding to a deeper message. And so the post-impressionists are starting to explore this. So for instance, Gauguin used colors in very representational ways. And so his rivers are orange and greens and reds, which is not the color of a river, but it symbolizes other things. This particular painting on 387, he's exploring, or he symbolizes the passage of life from birth to life to death. And he uses these three women sitting on the beach side as a representation of that, and that's symbolism. So this is post-impressionism, make thoughts and feelings visible. You have the art analysis where you will be looking at closer at Edvard Munch's work and answer the three questions that are in there, which are based on the lecture from last time and a little bit that I've said now. So I hope you guys are all rested. Looking forward to a good week. Thanks so much, and I'll see you online.